Welcome to Sight and Scene, the podcast where technology meets terrain and insights transform our understanding of the world. Hosted by industry experts with decades of experience, Sight and Scene dives into the cutting-edge tools and techniques reshaping how we visualize, map, and interact with the spaces around us.
In each episode, we explore the latest advancements in drones, GIS, CAD, geomatics, and scanning, showcasing applications not just in the built environment, but across a spectrum of industries from environmental monitoring to urban development and beyond. We bring you stories from the field and interviews with fascinating people on the cutting edge of geospatial technology.
But then we got a phone call from the family because we were able to get to him so quickly, because we were able to start those compressions. If we didn't have the drone, we would have found him expired and he wouldn't have had a shot.
Yeah.
But the family informed us that because he was an organ donor and because we were able to do compressions, he saved 12 other lives.
Ooh. Wow. Welcome to Sight and Scene. We have a very compelling and powerful episode in front of us today. We're super excited to have our first guest on the show, and it's a milestone for us, I like to think. So, Scott, how are you today?
Yeah, I'm excited that it's like no longer just us talking, that's going to be finally more people. So feeling good.
Last episode, or 2 episodes ago, we were focusing on drones for good and the broader concept of technology for the concept of good. So really excited about our guest today. And we're going to give an introduction here in just a minute. But there's been a busy few weeks in between since our last chat, Scott. So I know that you've been extremely busy traveling around conferences.
Oh, yeah.
You want to share just real quickly what you've been up to, and I'll chime in on the end.
Yeah, I'll give you the 5-minute version here. I'm sure we'll talk even more about this in the future. But last week was the Geo Week conference, big geospatial conference that takes place in Denver. It's been Denver last couple of years. Really, really cool convention. Lots of new laser scanners, lots of new cameras. Just the amount of software and platforms I saw there was like the largest variety I've seen yet. And giving you the short version, I'm amazed to see the price of laser scanners, especially just coming down. Like a big one I saw was GeoQ has a scanner that is now like hitting the 20 grand range.
Wow.
Which is really, really impressive. For anyone who's been doing LiDAR for a couple of years, that's like, that was crazy talk just a few years ago for, one of the mainline manufacturers to have that.
Yeah.
So that was the biggest surprise for me. But a ton of cool software. Esri was there, lots of GIS. And again, we'll talk more about that. But I was just really overwhelmed. I mean, I had a blast. Good time.
Yeah, right. I think the pace at which technology is, I guess it's nothing new. But the exciting part about our industry is that as the technology improves, costs go down. It's just it follows that curve. So it's good to see that it doesn't cost $200,000 anymore to get into laser scanning world, because it just wasn't doable for smaller and emerging businesses, and it was reserved for the extremely large businesses. So
yeah, and I'd say cost coming down was the number one theme I saw there too. Another real one was like Esri had a lot of features that were normally in the more expensive versions of ArcGIS, like something they call oriented imagery, which is like geotagged photos that intelligently know which way they're facing.
Interesting.
And that was, I guess, something that was in one of their more expensive versions. And the folks there were telling me it's now like in the most basic, most affordable commercial version of ArcGIS. So even the old school players, let's say, right, are bringing a lot of things down into the affordable range, which was awesome.
I think this world like this, just the way people were splitting up the surveyors and weren't necessarily talking to the geospatial people, or they were, but they weren't as connected as they could be. And I think it's good to see all of that changing with how technology is kind of being this unifier of these two big industries, so to speak. Yeah. And I just want to share real quick too. Scott and I just got done with our first collaboration together. I worked with a client up in Seattle to scan a building that's on the National Historic Registry and it's a 100-plus-year-old building in downtown Seattle, the Times Square building, where we scanned the entire facade of the building, created a high-definition 3D model, and then created architectural plans of each facade for my client to work with their team to do some restoration efforts and just, checking the general condition of the building. So excited to share some of those visuals here down the road on our respective channels, but always appreciate those fun endeavors with you, Scott.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. First non-talking collaboration, right?
Yeah.
It was an awesome project. I'm happy to not be sitting in front of AutoCAD for several hours at a time, even though I love doing that too. But nice too. It was such a cool thing. And the historic preservation angle was just such a cool bent to that project.
Yeah. It's nice to get paid for something, right?
That too. Yeah. Always is.
Okay. So moving on, we're starting to gravitate as a podcast more. We're going to share more about this in following episodes, but really we're loving the idea of how this technology, in particular drones, are being used for a broader use cases other than just for business and architects, engineers, contractors. And there's lots of people using this technology across the world for various reasons. And one thing that's really compelling to us is how it's being used for public good and for how they're being used to help people, help organizations, help the environment. So we're going to continue to focus on some of these use cases. And today our guest is doing some really incredible work with drones and so much more. So we're gonna introduce here Kyle Nordfors. Did I say that right, Kyle? Your last name?
You did. Good job.
Okay, great. Kyle, he's been in aviation for 25 years. He's currently a captain for Alaska Airlines, flying the B737. He's flown almost every category of aircraft that has wings. I want to hear more about that. But from single engines, light sports, gliders, fighters, helicopters, and of course, airlines. He's also the member of the Weber County Sheriff Search and Rescue Team. He's serving as the Air Ops Division Lead and the UAS Chair for the Mountain Rescue Association. Kyle's also husband to a search and rescue canine handler and a father of one daughter, 3 stepkids, and 1 adopted son. So 5 kids. It sounds like you got your hands full, Kyle.
Yeah, there's never a dull moment around here. Thankfully, most of the kids are all grown and moved out. So we only have one 16-year-old left. All the rest are out of the house and attempting to be successful adults, and we're very proud of them.
Well, that's awesome. So maybe just a little bit of empty nest syndrome, but not fully yet.
Oh no, we actually can't wait. But truthfully, we love our kids. We love being parents, but the thought of being able just to pick up and go and, act like kids again sounds amazing to us. But, my wife has a cadaver canine so that she uses in search and rescue. And then she also gets contracted or called out by the different CSIs and detectives around the state. And her dog actually requires more care and TLC than even infants do, it seems sometimes.
Wow.
Trying to travel with that dog is quite the hassle sometimes.
Yeah. So you really can't get away after all.
Yeah.
Well, I always like seeing, there's a lot of dogs in training. And I don't know for search and rescue, but just like support dogs that I see. I think there might be a trainer in our neighborhood or something because they're always walking different dogs down. And we have a big Malamute Husky dog who's generally pretty mellow tempered, but just random dogs just set they set each other off, and it's like, come on, let this dog train and do their thing, right?
Well, actually, in public safety now, there's a big push there over the last couple of years. There's been a huge discovery that using dogs and drones together are more or less a force multiplier. And so we've been deploying and training with the canine teams quite effectively. So, for example, on let's say a suspect search, and you have an apprehension dog going down a trail or looking around through buildings, you can have the drone up above, kind of following the handler and the
Mm-hmm.
canine. And if the pilot is trained up on how to kind of read the dog as well, the drone pilot can actually take cues from the dog and zip
Wow.
ahead or look ahead, or also give warnings to the handler. Like if they're going down a trail,
Yeah.
the drone pilot can give a heads up to the handler, say, hey, up around this next bend, there's another person walking with the dog. So, just a heads up on that. Or you might have some deer or some other type of animal off on the side. So
Yeah.
if the dog might get distracted by that, I actually have some fantastic video of one of my counterparts who's actually in Oregon. He has a great video of where he found the suspect with the dog, but he used to be a canine handler. And so he was able to take cues from the dog.
Hmm.
And while watching the dog, he was looking in the area in which the dog was kind of indicating, and he found the suspect, gave the instruction to the handler on the ground, and did the little sundial instruction. So the handler put his arm out, and the drone pilot said, no, rotate it clockwise. Okay, stop right there. In the direction in which your hand is pointing is where the suspect is.
Wow.
And they released the dog, and the dog went and got his bite. I personally have been involved with teaming up dogs and canines on a SWAT call, where I was able to search the entire house with an interior drone. And the only place where I couldn't access was a crawl space down in the bottom floor of the house.
Mm-hmm.
And we sent the apprehension canine in to kind of verify that somebody was behind there. Now, we wanted to send the canine in first before we sent our teams in, because the suspect allegedly had some guns, and we didn't want to put our guys in front of the door, potentially with a suspect behind the door with a gun.
Right.
And so I followed the canine in with the drone, just basically right on top of his tail as he was going through the house.
Oh my
And
gosh.
he indicated right on that door that we couldn't enter. And sure enough, that's where he was. And so then we could come up with a sure game plan as to how to extract this individual out of that crawl space.
Wow.
So just using dogs and canines together are truly a force multiplier in almost every sense of the word. And it's not very intuitive. You wouldn't think that, but when you team up the drones and the dogs, it's especially when the drone pilot is familiar with canines and is able to understand the basic science behind a dog and how they indicate and scent cones and how they double back, just simple basic things. It's an amazing team.
Well, it sounds like, the drone pilot is taking cues from the dog. Are you seeing the reciprocal of that, where the dogs are starting to take cues from the drones? Like, are you at a point where you're seeing there's some intentional training to possibly flip that script a little bit on how they're working with each other? Is that kind of a little bit nebulous, hard thing for the dog to comprehend?
I think you would probably have to ask a more advanced canine handler to answer that question. I would suspect that you wouldn't want to do that because you want the dog to be completely impervious to the drone, to operate and work, ignoring the drone altogether.
Yeah.
The apprehension
that's
dog,
not my dog.
Yeah. The apprehension dog that I was working with, his name was Venom, and man, I am so glad he's on our team.
Yeah.
He's a Belgian Malinois, just an amazing dog. His handler's fantastic. And that dog couldn't have cared less that my interior drone was hovering up above his tail. He wanted to get his bite. So it would be hard to, I think, it would be hard to train the dog to know when you want it to pay attention to the drone and when you don't want it to pay attention to the drone. So I think the best thing, so we train with them to kind of desensitize the dogs to the drones, so that they just know that they're there and they just ignore them. So,
wow, that's fascinating. I had no idea how. I mean, it makes sense too when the way you're laying it out, just how they're complementing each other or really taking cues from the dog. Well, let's zoom back out. I want to hear more of your origin story. We gave you the good intro, but tell us a little bit more about yourself, how you became involved with MRA, their mission, and obviously more than MRA, because I know you're involved in other things, but just your role within the organizations as well.
Yeah, you bet. So I'm an aviation nut. I love everything about aviation, and I've always tried to get into every aircraft I possibly can. But I also love photography. And so my introduction into drones was that, I was always that weirdo that had the professional camera, even though I wasn't a professional photographer. I just loved having, the science, the technology behind it, in addition to aviation. And so my wife thought, I'm going to go out and buy him a drone for his birthday one year,
Nice
and
gift.
that was it. So she said it just made sense. You're a pilot and you love photography, so here's a flying camera. And, so with that, I loved it. I really took to it, and did the best.
What year was this?
This would have been in 2015.
Okay.
2015. So
Okay.
So what
10
drone?
years ago.
That was that like Phantom 2?
Phantom
something
4.
Like that?
Yeah,
Okay,
it was
cool.
a Phantom
Cool.
4. Yeah. And I just took to it. I absolutely loved it, trying to educate myself more on it and how to get better shots. The way I got wrapped up into search and rescue was that my local city here had a mayor who was also serving in the National Guard. And so while he was acting as our current mayor, he got deployed to Afghanistan in 2018, and he was unfortunately shot and killed. And as a community, we really wanted to wrap our arms around his family. And he was a young guy. He had just barely turned 40, and he had 7 kids.
Oh,
because that's what you do in Utah. You have lots of kids.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to wrap our arms around his family and his sweet wife and his amazing kids. So the community decided to fly or hang the world's largest free hanging American flag in one of our canyons here. And they needed a means by which to get the rope from one side of the canyon across this 1,000-foot span to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And I had an Instagram page where I posted a lot of pictures of aerial shots of our hometown. So they asked if I'd be willing to do that with my drone. And it was the search and rescue team that was asked to do the rigging of the rope and the flag. So it was through that service project that I met the search and rescue commander. And I started talking to him about, whether or not he uses drones in search and rescue. And he said that they've tried it, but they weren't successful with it, and pretty much just threw down a challenge to me that if I wanted to join the search and rescue team to do it, and then to try to really, since with my background in aviation, to really try to expand it into something more.
Mm-hmm.
So I did. I submitted my application, and it was actually pretty comical when I interviewed with the search and rescue team, because part of it, so here in Ogden, Utah, we have we're a very high angle, very technical mountainous terrain environment here. And so our search and rescue guys are experts. They think sleeping on the side of a cliff in a tent hanging, 2,000 feet off the ground is a nice day to spend a weekend. These guys,
I could see that.
Yeah. They're incredible in what and they're talented, these men and women. And so when on the application asked what are my hiking and climbing experiences, I said, well, I was in Boy Scouts once, and I was woefully underqualified. Woefully underqualified to even sit in the same room as these individuals. But it was just my aviation experience that none of them had. And so they accepted me on it as an experiment. I was able to go out and I had to buy my own thermal drone.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, this was in late 2018. So the only one that was remotely affordable was the Mavic 2 Enterprise Dual with that terrible thermal camera on it. So they brought me on. And so I started trying to come up with some standard operating procedures, and I was merging my aviation knowledge and expertise to the search and rescue world. And sure enough, the very first rescue that I was involved in involved 3 men in their early 20s that decided to go hiking in one of our canyons around 1 p.m. And this was in April, so it was still relatively warm during the day, but come nightfall, it gets still below freezing. Sure. And so they were hiking in tennis shoes, shorts, and T-shirts. And come around 10 p.m., they finally decided that they needed to call for help, and they called 911. And so we were dispatched. So I showed up, and sure enough, we had a cell phone ping that was delivered to us. But the cell phone ping here in the mountains, when you have a mountain range and you can only ping from one side of the mountain range, the cell phone pings are wildly inaccurate. They're inconsistent. The confidential rating of them are typically super low.
Yeah.
And so they had a ping. So they dispatched our high angle team, our ground teams into that area. And I had already searched that area and saw that nobody was there with the drone. And so I started looking elsewhere. I actually found them 3 canyons to the south.
Wow.
With the drone. And so with that, I was able to relay those coordinates to our ground teams. And by the time our hasty high angle guys got to them, and I have great video of it, I had the spotlight on top of the drone. 2 of the young men had already fallen asleep. They were shivering and freezing cold, and they had already fallen asleep, which is not good when you're talking hypothermia.
Right.
And so our teams got to them, warmed them up, put some warm clothes on them, got them harnessed up, and we were able to extract them off the mountain. And so the search and rescue commander credited the drone to saving their lives, that if we didn't have the drone, and this just happened to be the very first rescue I participated in.
Wow. Talk about a proof of concept.
Yeah,
like right
right?
there.
Immediately. Yeah. And so from there, I was, from there, it was a given that we were going to be using the drone on every single rescue. I was also approved to start fundraising for another drone. So I got together a bunch of people, and we did a public fundraiser, and we were able to raise enough money to buy our M300 when it was first announced. And so from there, we've just been gangbusters ever since. So that's how we got involved with the search and rescue team. And then so our county, Weber County, is part of the Mountain Rescue Association, and we just started having more success with our drone program here than any other mountain rescue team. And so the mountain rescue president just approached me and asked that if I'd be willing to head up the UAS committee. And so that's what I've done. So I've been able to travel to these other Mountain Rescue Association teams and help them set up their teams. And basically all I've done, I haven't done anything special or out of the ordinary, but just because I had the experience in aviation with the airlines and other types of flying, that I just brought my aviation experience and aviation best practices, crew resource management, and how we set our incident management up, our ICS structure, for lack of a better term, and combined it with search and rescue. And it's really taken hold, and it's been very, very successful. And so having someone with that aviation experience on a team, whether it be a certified flight instructor or just someone with their private pilot certificate, I really helps, because then you're able to, what it's like to be up there in the aircraft looking down. You understand a little bit better of what needs to happen, when it needs to happen, and how to push the aircraft to its limits. In public safety, and I have a little bit of a bias here, especially in search and rescue, we push the aircraft further and harder than almost any other type of flying with the drone outside of FPV racing.
Right.
We push the aircraft to its limits, and we expose the aircraft to weather conditions and other situations that we test the limits of what the manufacturer's recommendations are. And so having a little bit of that aviation experience really goes a long ways, particularly in search and rescue, I think. And of course, I recognize my bias in that.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like anecdotally, you probably know way more about these drones' capabilities than most. And, obviously the manufacturers will put out their operating temperatures, and the controller's always screaming at you when it wants to fly back. You got to know like what features to turn on and off to override those to make sure that you're getting the job done and possibly saving a life. So that's amazing. For one, hearing that story, and two, just like hearing a little bit more about how your general aviation knowledge has kind of brought that into the forefront. So would you say that with MRA, it's mostly you're putting processes in place nationally so that they have these best practices and something to follow. And is there a training component with the actual equipment as well? Is that something you've developed, or is it all they're kind of doing that individually on their own?
No. So the answer is yes, I guess, to all of it. We do. I'm fortunate enough to have on my local team here a gentleman by the name of Dr. John Soul, who has been in search and rescue for 35 years. And so he's the one, he's kind of been my counterpoint. I can't take all the credit for the SOPs and everything. He's been instrumental in helping me formulate these SOPs with incorporating search and rescue best practices. He's the one that has taught me all the ins and outs of lost person behavior and search theory and all of that. And this gentleman is actually would probably be a great person for you all to have on your podcast as well. He was actually very good friends with Stephen Hawking. He has a PhD in physics.
Wow.
And has quite the life story. He actually has a picture of him holding the wheelchair while Stephen was proposing to his widow, and he helped facilitate that. Amazing man, an amazing story, an amazing life. But with his help, we've developed like a boilerplate of standard operating procedures that we've made available to anybody and everybody that wants to operate in search and rescue. So not just the MRA, but we've made it available to everybody. And then I have developed certain training protocols that help enable or that highlight certain search and rescue maneuvers or flight characteristics that we run into in search and rescue incessantly, including how to type of it's amazing to me how how terribly Hollywood has put into our minds the capabilities of thermal cameras.
Oh yeah.
And so part of the training is to actually go over thermography, and not such that they have their thermography certificate, but just at least a basic understanding of what a thermal camera can do, and more importantly, what a thermal camera cannot do, and understanding its limitations. So we go through that. But I also teamed up with Greg from the Pilot Institute. If you're familiar with the pilotinstitute.com.
Oh yeah,
definitely. Greg is fantastic.
Yes. What I really like about Greg, and I've always thought about the cream, people that do things for the right reason, the cream always rises to the top, and that's Greg in a nutshell. He had very humble beginnings when he started as he's a CFI. He has his commercial pilot certificate. He's an aviator through and through. And just by watching some of his YouTube videos, you think that his experience is only with drones, but he is a very experienced aviator, and he understands the FAA and the regulations and why things are the way they are. And so with his courses, he does an amazing job of not only explaining the regulations, but he also explains the why behind it. And so
that's so critical, the why
behind really
things. Yeah.
And so he and I started talking, and he offered that we do a search and rescue course on his platform. And so I was able to go down to Prescott and team up with the Pilot Institute team, which their staff is amazing. They're a great group of people. And we were able to develop a search and rescue course through the Pilot Institute. And of course, our MRA team members get a little bit of a discount for it. But
that would be for counties too, right? Like it's for anybody who wants to implement this type of program into their.
Yep.
Or any individual, I imagine.
It's for anybody that wants to learn the ins and outs of search and rescue. And in that, we talk about not only what makes a good search and rescue drone, but we talk about lost person behavior. We get into how to start a search. We talk about training protocols. What type of maneuvers do you need in search and rescue? We talk about not hitting or allowing it to return to home. You're a pilot first, you need to fly the aircraft. But two, if you're able to come back and fly the aircraft back on an approach path, just like, all fixed wing air and even helicopters, all manned aircraft come in on an approach path. If you're able to do that and do it effectively, you can get about another 5 to 7 minutes, depending on how far out you are, how high you are on station, which will allow you to search a little bit longer, stay with your patient that's up in the field a little bit longer. It's life-saving. And so understanding the flight limitations and capabilities of the aircraft with the procedures and maneuvers that we teach in that course can be life-saving. So when I travel with the MRA, we do go over a lot of those procedures and those capabilities of the aircraft as well.
Wow, that's great. I'm going to zoom us back out to 10,000 feet, pardon the pun. But before I do that, because we're going to go into our segment piece about fun facts. But before that, I think it'd be good just to hear a little bit more about your commercial aviation experience, and particularly as a pilot for Alaska Airlines, just how that's informing your work in drones. But just generally speaking, I think it's fascinating to talk to somebody who is behind the controls of a 737.
So I actually will hopefully, Mike, you'll think this is funny. I learned really quick, the hard way, the easiest way to upset anybody from Oregon or Washington. And that is to announce that you're taking them. Let's say you're operating a flight from Orlando up to Seattle, and you say, "Okay, guys, we're thank you for joining us on our flight to the Pacific Northeast." So upset about that. And then when you break down, I mean, you guys are into the geography is super important when referencing the Pacific. Oregon and Washington are in the Pacific Northeast, not the Pacific Northwest. And so, Japan and China and Russia are in the Pacific Northwest. But anyway, there's
so
a fun
true.
fact for you. If you ever want to upset anybody,
we could do a whole section on like geographically accurate but locally upsetting. I think that could have a whole topic on that.
And with the camera, I can see Mike just turned a little red. I think I just upset him. I apologize.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Well, it's all right. I've been here almost 10 years now, so I think I'm pretty rooted. So love that.
But back to, so I guess that could be my fun fact. That's the best way or the easiest way to upset people from that neck of the woods. But I do think that one of my biggest assets in the drone industry, since I do fly a 737, is understanding the other side of aviation. Why is 400 feet our limit? Why are the zero grids, or when the UAS facility map was constructed, why are those grids the altitudes that they're at? Just kind of understanding the why behind a lot of it has helped me quite a bit in the drone space. Yeah. And then also bringing those safety protocols over to the drone space. For example, something just simple. So I was just recently at the Law Enforcement Drone Association conference in Houston, and we're actually going to be hosting it here in Utah in May. But I love the LEDA guys. The LEDA guys do such an amazing job of teaching aviation safety. And one of the simplest things you can do is establishing your flight operations area where you're going to be taking off and landing, and your departure and approach corridors, especially when you're operating multiple drones at once. And then when you go to start the props, yelling clear props. For all the private pilot certificate holders out there, that when you're going to be starting your single engine Cessna or Piper or Cirrus or whatever it is, you need to hang your head out the window and yell clear props. I can't even begin to tell you how many times I've seen on these public safety operations, or just people flying drones in general, don't announce that they're starting their propellers, especially if you're flying a bigger drone like an Inspire 3, a Matrice 300, a Matrice 30, or the Dragonfish. Or
those are big drones.
They will do some damage.
Yeah.
And we have in our fleet, we have a Flycart 30 that will do a lot of damage with those great big huge counter-rotating propellers. So aviation safety, I think, is probably my biggest takeaway, and bringing it over to the UAS world. It's shocking how, to me, I guess it's shocking. Just this has been my lifeblood for so long, aviation safety, And it's surprising how little of that is in the UAS world. And there's a group of us really trying hard to bring that aviation safety culture, that aviation safety perspective over to the UAS world, regardless of what aspect or what industry you're operating that drone in. It's still an aviation asset. You're still a pilot. Your remote pilot certificate says pilot on it. And
Mm-hmm.
so we need to act like aviators and advertise and support and promote that aviation safety culture.
I think that's so important for our listeners to hear, because I don't know how upset you got when you heard about that drone hitting the Super Scooper down in Southern California, but just I see people doing things recreationally with drones that just irks me to no end, being a commercial pilot. And it's like, okay, we need we need to change the mindset behind that. Well, I guess the perception people have about drone pilots, and it doesn't help when you have recreational pilots, or I guess it could be a commercial drone pilot too, that is doing something that they shouldn't be doing, or not taking that safety factor as serious as it should be taken.
Well, and the problem is next to never the commercial pilots, the 107 pilots. It's almost always the people that buy the drones at whatever big box store, and a lot of them, that to no fault of their own, they just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't understand the why. Like we've talked about that quite a bit so far, the why behind the regulations and why they exist. So flying into Los Angeles International, LAX, for those that are familiar with that airport, just the most common runways are the east-west. It's landing to the west. So we approach the airport from the east, from over the city, and the two runways straddle SoFi Stadium. SoFi Stadium is this brand new stadium where the Chargers and the Rams play.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that stadium, they have a marquee, a digital marquee. And incessantly, I see drones flying above that stadium, trying to get pictures of that marquee, because the marquee's there for people flying. Because you if you're landing on the north runway, you look off to the left and you can see what it's saying, and if you're landing on the south runway, I'll look off to the right, and you can they have advertisements and fun things on top of it, and so people want to fly their drones to get pictures of that. But we're only maybe 700 feet above that.
Wow.
Coming into land, and I might be off on that exact altitude, but we're in our landing phase of flight, gear down, flaps down, we're cleared to land. And I see drones flying over that stadium frequently.
Wow, that's crazy. And I think Kyle, I also have my private pilot license as well, so I think
awesome.
This is something I've tell me if you feel this way too. One of the tricky things with drones, I think, is you can't just hop into a Cessna 152 casually and turn it on and just putz around in the air, right? There's a mechanism for all this stuff. And maybe the challenge with drones is I find that like you can be a passive pilot, unfortunately, quite easily. You can just kind of operate it like you would a cell phone instead of an aircraft. And I don't know if you find that, and if that's an attitude that you're usually trying to tackle with new pilots or people who don't know, or just educating. But that's, to me, do you see that that's a big like pilot background versus perhaps non-pilot background attitude that you see?
Undoubtedly, I do agree with you, Scott. I think the barrier to entry is so incredibly low when it comes to drones, to this type of aircraft, that it has built in a false sense of security when it comes to the pilot at the controls, that the drone will fly itself. They're so easy to take off and land, and if I crash it into a building, oh well, no big deal. But or if I crash it into a tree, no big deal. I'm not hurting anybody, and that's generally the attitude that you get, particularly with, there was that big case out of that from that gentleman in Philadelphia that he always had that attitude. Who am I hurting? What I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not causing any. And the reality is that no, you are causing a lot of, it's the potential harm, right?
Yeah.
What's the potential damage that can be done here? And Mike, like you alluded, the potential outcome of this, like when that DJI Mini struck that Super Scooper, I mean, who knows how much damage was caused? Forget the damage to the aircraft, but pulling that aircraft out of service,
Yeah.
how much
Yeah.
damage was done to the ground because that aircraft was not able to be up in service and putting the additional fires out. I think the barrier to entry is very, very low. And I think, the FAA has its position, and they've been trying to play catch up when it comes to the drone space, because the technology moves so much faster than regulations do. And which is great and terrible all at the same time. And so I think it's going to be more incumbent on us, the community, to try to help educate other people and bring the awareness to everybody's attention as to why these rules, these regulations are the way they are. When I present at LIDA or Drone Responders or some of these other conferences, when I talk about crew resource management, which is an aviation best practice, I talk about the why do we go into these accidents and start talking about them. Well, we need to understand the why behind everything. We need to understand how these error chains started linking together. And then the conclusion is always we end up getting more regulations. And so these regulations are like the Tenerife accident in 1977. These regulations are quite not literally written in blood, but they are written in blood. Yeah. They are written because blood was spilled. And I fear the day that we're going to have some drone regulations that are written in blood. Many of the regulations that we currently have are written from, handovers from the manned aviation world, or just more or less common sense.
Right.
But I certainly hope that we don't have an accident that forces the FAA to write some regulations that are written in blood.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more on the education component of, it is so easy, the threshold to go. I mean, you can just go to Best Buy and buy a drone and be out there flying it without even knowing that you have to get a trust certificate as a recreational flyer. And Scott and I actually talked about this a little bit a couple episodes ago when we were talking about the fires in Southern California. And it's like, what things could some of these box stores or manufacturers do? Like, could you maybe have to snap a photo of your trust certificate before it'll actually unlock the drone to fly, or things like that? But I'm just seeing that DJI removed their geofencing recently. It seems like it's going in the opposite direction, putting more of the trust in the community around drones to educate, and maybe even some of the resellers of these products. So I hope that day doesn't come where there's, an accident that, spawns regulations that have to go into place. But I think statistically speaking, I think it's probably likely something is going to happen, unfortunately, before people are like, whoa. Part of what we're trying to do as a podcast is educate people, but we're also trying to turn the spotlight on, all the people that are not doing good things with drones, so that all the good things that are happening with drones, because there's, there are so many things like the work you're doing that just, it's an amazing technology that needs to be, the power that you have, or the risk that's associated with that, needs to be respected and taken seriously.
Well, they've become such a staple in our daily lives. And I think the average citizen walking on the street doesn't quite understand the work that you two do with your reality capture, and the importance and the value that's behind that. And then you couple in public safety and how much we've become reliant on these drones to help maintain and preserve and save life, that if we had an accident because someone was being stupid, or pilot error, whatever you want to call it, and then we're not able to use these assets, these aviation tools, then it'll be quite damaging. And I don't think there has been a study done that will show how damaging and impactful it will have to our economy as a whole. Not only, commercially, the drones for inspections, for mapping, for in agriculture. If we're complaining now that our groceries are expensive now, can you imagine if our farmers could no longer use drones to either put herbicide, insecticide, or multispectral drones to inspect the health of their plants and all that? All those costs will skyrocket and go up even more. So
precision agriculture is, it makes so much sense. Instead of just blasting your entire crop with herbicide, like, you can spot spot apply as
So
needed.
cool.
So it's saving resources. It's, not putting those chemicals in areas that they don't need it. I mean, it makes a whole lot of sense.
This industry is huge, and it's so broad. There are very few. One could argue that the cell phone is something or just computers at large is an industry or a technology that spans so many different technologies or so many different industries that if you remove it, it will be impactful worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
I think drones using this aerial asset is so broad in its spectrum that it encompasses so many different industries that it would have a very similar impact if suddenly we were no longer able to use these assets, like from agriculture, mapping, public safety, and the list goes on and on. We're just scratching the surface.
Yeah. We saw a tiny bit of that here when all the TFRs popped up in New Jersey and New York and all of that. And I sat in on some like AVSI meetings, and the one upside to that, I was so happy to hear the calls were flooding in, calls, emails, because everyone from a film studio to an inspection company to the agencies themselves that use drones and weren't permitted to operate in those TFRs because they weren't part of that, all came up and said, this is killing us right now. This is really damaging our ability to do business or to do our job. So yeah, that was kind of my eye-opening experience of just how many other industries outside of what Mike and I are in really do use this every single day.
Yeah, every single day. For all those drones that were flying in New Jersey that were shaped like 737s.
Yeah, exactly.
We did an episode on that, Kyle. I don't know if you had a chance to.
I did.
Tune into
that. Yeah, it was great.
A lot of them very oddly airplane shaped. It's kind of crazy. Right?
Yeah, funny how that happens.
Funny. Well, real quick, Scott, Kyle, I don't know if you wanted to expand any more on your fun fact, but I want to make sure that because I know Scott and I had a couple quick anecdotes to share.
Please do.
Yeah, Scott, you want to jump in real quick with your fun fact?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Mine is like totally unrelated to any of this. I was being a little lazy this week and was like, what happened on this day in history, on this week in history? And I found a good one. And for some reason, geology always seems to be what we're spinning to on these. I guess on this week in history in 1961, there was this object that they called the Coso artifact that was discovered. And I guess some prospectors in California were looking for geodes. They pulled one out and they cracked it open and they found a spark plug inside it. And so for a while they tried to maybe pawn it off, maybe a little like Ripley's Believe It or Not, as like either an ancient civilization or just like some time travel or something, because they're like, how the heck did a spark plug like from apparently the 1920s get inside a geode? And long story short, some group of scientists came in and checked it and tested it, and I guess they found that it was like exactly the spark plug that was like on the Model T in the 1920s. So a pretty popular spark plug actually, like for cars back then. And they found that because those spark plugs had so much iron inside them, apparently that reacted and did something basically called like basically how cement works, where you have a what do they call it? Basically concretion is the process where the iron reacts and sediment builds around it, and it forms pretty much as hard a shell as you would get from a geode. So just a crazy little one there. Yeah. So if you're ever digging for rocks and you find a spark plug in it, there you go. That's how that happened.
Yeah. I think it's funny when you see tree like power lines in your neighborhood and you see a tree, like it had grown through a tree, like a tree just enveloped the line and it grows around. So it's always fascinating to see that. I'll keep mine pretty short and maybe it might segue back into search and rescue, but I moved to a mountain town in 2004, so Crested Butte, Colorado, and I was almost someone that needed search and rescue. So we left Atlanta, Georgia. This is the week after Thanksgiving, 2004. It's like balmy 60 something degrees. We get to Crested Butte, and we had a diesel moving truck, and it was 30 below, and the diesel froze in the engine. And we couldn't start the truck, so we sat there at our hotel waiting to close on our house and actually be able to start a truck. But anyway, my first week of living in Crested Butte, so I grew up in the Midwest, so had no concept of avalanche. I mean, of course, I had a concept of avalanches, but not just how serious it was. So I had a pair of snowshoes, and there was this great little hike just, a mile up the road from our house. And I stayed on the trail, some switchbacks, but then I got to a point where I'm like, I'm just going to go straight up this pitch. And I start snowshoeing up this, I would call it maybe 35-degree slope. And as I was nearing the top, where it's kind of the inflection point of it, I heard this loud pop and then this woofing sound. So if you are in the know about snow and avalanche dangers, when you hear this, basically the whole slab of this hillside cracked at the top and then it settled. And when it settled, like the frequency of that bass sound just shook my body. And I knew like, I didn't know exactly what it meant, but instinctively I was like, oh, this is not good. And I saw the crack. It was maybe 20, 30 feet up the hill still. So I'm like, what do I do? And I just gingerly walked up to the top and got above the crack and traversed my way out of there. But pretty quickly, I was like, okay, this is a different world that I'm living in now. And I need to know about mountain safety in the winters here in Colorado. And since then, I never did take an avalanche course, but I read the avalanche report every single morning. And I, of course, was observing the weather. So I started to make the correlations as to why certain things were riskier and when to go out, when to not go out. And it was a humbling and eye-opening experience for me. That it's like, wow, that could have been so much worse.
Yeah, it's shocking how dangerous avalanches are and how damaging they can be. We in our neck of the woods, our neighborhood here, we're right up next to the mountains. I mean, literally right up next to the mountains, and we have these steep canyons. And during these big snowfalls, or the day after these big snowfalls, we can actually hear the avalanches coming down. Mm-hmm. And it's such an impressive, fun sound, as long as you're not in them.
Right.
They are impressive. Yeah. We actually have, with the help of Dr. John Soule, we've actually developed with the Matrice 30 and the Matrice 300, putting an avalanche beacon out in front of the drone. So then that way, if we are called onto an avalanche, we can actually fly the drone with the beacon on receive.
Oh, that's smart.
And if the person has their avalanche beacon on, we can, in trainings, we actually haven't had to deploy this yet for real yet, but we can find the avalanche beacon within 90 seconds from launch.
Wow.
It's pretty awesome. We had to do a bunch of test trials on it because the radio interference frequencies from the controller to the drone seem to interfere a little bit. The smaller drones do better than the larger drones, but more or less what we do when we do get called out into an avalanche area, or if we're on a snowmobile rescue, we'll typically have that drone on standby, ready to go with the avalanche beacon. Not so much because we're there to try to find some, but just in case one of our teammates gets stuck in an avalanche while executing a mission, we can find them quickly with that. Typically in an avalanche, if you're calling search and rescue to come and pull somebody out, it's an extraction, it's a recovery effort at that point typically. But we'll have that beacon drone ready to go just in case our team gets in the wrong place at the wrong time.
That is so smart. I've done some backcountry skiing in my time at Crested Butte, and Scott, I don't know if, it's not common knowledge on how some of this stuff works, but you have a beacon and a shovel and a probe, and you have all this gear when you go into the backcountry, and right before you drop into, say you climb to the top of this mountain and you're about to drop into this bowl and ski, you flip your receiver to transmitting a signal so that if you get buried in an avalanche, then all your ski partners would turn theirs to receive. So they'd flip it back to receive, and then they could locate you. So having that on a drone, that's
brilliant.
Like speeding up the ability to get to somebody. That's amazing.
I suppose that works kind of like an EPIRB, right? Like your standard kind of SAR beacons that you'd find there, or is it a little bit of a different kind of device?
I'm not familiar with one, but I know the beacon's usually it's like you strap it around your body. Yeah. It's like a chest strap, and you have it just tethered to you. But that's really cool. So getting back into bigger picture of the search and rescue, what types of, you mentioned a few of the drones and platforms that you're using, but are there certain drones that you're using for certain circumstances and then others. Can you just talk through that a little bit?
You bet. Each asset, each drone, each aircraft has a mission set to it that we will deploy depending on what it is that we need the drone to do. We do have some, the DJIs. We also have some Autels. We even have some American-made drones that unfortunately stay in their boxes because they're just not up to snuff, even the latest and greatest from the American companies.
Mm-hmm.
And which is one of the reasons why I'm so anti the legislation that's potentially coming through. And I know that that's a whole different conversation, but
yeah,
I
think we're all aligned on that though.
So depending on the type of search that we're executing in the area in which we're searching, if it's like a snowmobile, if we're up in the very high country and we need to search a great big huge area and we need to toss the drone really far down range,
Mm-hmm.
well, our first go-to is going to be the Oddtail Dragonfish, just because that has the range and the reach, the thermal camera and the zoom camera and the capabilities that you'd need for something like that. If it's searching up and down a canyon, a cliff face, and it's we're looking for someone quick and we need to deploy rapidly, then we turn to the Matrice 30T because that thing is so agile and able to do so much so quickly. We can just pull that thing out and go quickly.
Yeah.
If it's going to be something where we need a big spotlight and with a really good zoom camera and we need the flight time, then we're pulling out the Matrice 350 with the H30T, and that the resolution on that H30T is leading the industry. It's amazing. So
it's an amazing sensor.
Yeah, so what we need in search and rescue, for example, if any legislators are listening, we need to have an asset that is not only capable and reliable, but we need the connectivity to work so that we can truly send it downrange with confidence. And then we also need it to fit our budget.
Mm-hmm.
Search and rescue teams throughout the country are mostly volunteer. In the national parks, of course, they get paid. In certain national parks, they have their own search and rescue teams. But search and rescue, we're just volunteers. And a lot of these assets that, when it comes to our snowmobile team, they'll show up with their own personal sleds. Our climb team, our riggers, they all show up with their own harnesses and their own, as a team, we might outfit them with a jacket and a helmet. But by and large, their tools are their own. And the drones are no exception to that rule. And so we need to have an aircraft that is affordable. And all of these aircraft, minus the Dragonfish, are affordable-ish for us, such that we can conduct fundraisers to be able to get these. So we typically have a drone that has certain mission sets, and we'll deploy the drone according to that mission set. Now, in search and rescue, most people just kind of think that the drone is a search mechanism or a search tool only. But I'm here to argue that it is so much more than just a search tool. So, for example, and I have some fantastic video that I'm happy to share. If anybody wants to reach out to me, I'm happy to share this video where
we could probably include some of those in the resources for the description.
But we'll turn the drone into, so after we find the individual, now what type of search we're going to conduct and where we're going to search, of course, is a whole nother subject. But let's say we use the drone to execute our search and we find our individual. Well, from there, we're going to, we go from a search role into a support role. With that, we can provide, if it's at night, we can provide ambient light, whether we have like the Matrice 350, CZI makes some amazing spotlights for the Matrice series, and we can provide that spotlight. You talk to our ground teams, and they absolutely love the light that we're able to provide them at night.
Cool.
In addition to that, that light also provides a support, like a sense of everything's going to be okay to the people that we're rescuing.
Yeah, who are maybe in shock or borderline hypothermic. That could be huge.
So, yeah, well, we interviewed, she was a 72-year-old woman. She and her partner were out hiking and they got lost. and they didn't know if they were going to be found that night. And she talks about, we interviewed her afterwards, and for one of our fundraisers. So she knew she was on camera for the fundraiser, but she was describing as she was sitting up on top of that cliff, cuddling, trying to stay warm with her hiking partner, and they saw the drone coming up over the cliff with the spotlight shining down on her, that it just made her want to cry, because she knew she was found, that help was on the way. And so
it just gave me the chills. That's
providing that light, that support, that sense of well-being to our patients is it's invaluable. It's amazing. Then from there, as part of that support role, we can also deliver certain mechanisms or different items to the people on the mountain, whether that be grabbing a quick SGI waiver to fly a radio with because the battery has hazardous materials. So we have to get a waiver, permission to fly a radio up, or a battery charger, or medical supplies, or something. We can use delivery drones. We have a Flycart 30, which is absolutely amazing, that allows us to fly the litter up the mountain. So if we have a very critical patient and we don't have a helicopter available, or the ceilings are such that we can't get a helicopter up there, well, we can fly the litter up to our hasty teams up there, so they can quickly extract the patient off the mountain. So they don't have to sit up there and wait 2 hours for another team to hike up there with the litter, or medical supplies. Or we had a situation recently where a person was out mountain biking, and they crashed and broke their femur. Of course, they couldn't ride their bike out, and the bike was now totaled. So we used a drone to fly the mountain bike off the mountain. Wow. So then that way, we weren't littering, we weren't leaving it up there, and we weren't putting it onto the backs of one of our volunteers to haul that bike off the mountain. So
their job's hard enough than to haul a bike off the mountain.
So support role is the second role. So search role, support role. And then from there, let's say they don't need any support. Well, it turns into the last role that we found, that is incident command overwatch, where incident command we can broadcast the video. There's a lot of different softwares and technology out there that allows you to broadcast what it is that you're seeing to your teammates, if they have connectivity on the mountain. If not, incident command definitely will. The Starlink Mini has been such a godsend. It has been so amazing for public safety use with drones, that we're able to broadcast what everybody's able to see. We had a rescue where it was a man out backcountry. He was had a split board, so he was just hiking up the mountain and then skiing down, and he got lost. He was following somebody else's trail and he got cliffed out, and he didn't know how to get down, so he called us. His wife was at incident command, just a nervous wreck. And so once we turned into incident command overwatch, we were able to bring his wife into our command vehicle and show her, like, no, there's your husband. He's right there. See, he's moving, he's talking, he's fine. And to see her go from all tense and nervous and crying and panicking to, okay, he's all right. He's coming home tonight.
And you got your eyes on him.
Yeah. And so so Overwatch, Incident Command Overwatch is the last role. So these are so much more than just a search mechanism. And yes, the search mechanism is probably its strongest thing, but it does do so much more than just search.
That is cool. I'm so glad you mentioned that. It's kind of one of the questions we're going to ask, like what kind of deliverables, so to speak, because we'll call them deliverables when it comes to like mapping inspection. But you basically listed them all right there, and it's a lot. I mean, I can't believe you're even doing basically drone delivery in a sense to get those supplies up. Are there any other like softwares? You mentioned Starlink. That's a great one. Any other like software tools that you consider like part of the drone program and essential to it to either like process the data or maybe relay video? Like what else are you using?
Yeah, there's a lot of different companies out there that are providing fantastic software solutions for public safety drone use. Some of the most widely used ones are the broadcasting technologies, and I would say that DroneSense is one of the leaders in that space. Aloft also has their platform, and so does
Mhm.
Air Data, the ability to be able to broadcast. DJI and Autel also have their own in-house system to help broadcast. We use the DJI One Flight Hub 2 quite frequently.
Mhm.
We
Okay.
like that one because it allows us to use all the features on the drone. We don't have to, we can fly in the native app. In Drone Sense, you have to fly, and in the other ones, you have to fly in their app, which reduces some of the drone's capabilities. You can't use all the features that the drone has to offer. So we kind of like to use the native app more often than not, but they all work beautifully to be able to broadcast back. Then we didn't talk too much about how we search or what type of searches that we do. And so we have priorities built into what search we do in what order, depending on the person that we're searching for in the environment in which we're searching. I know you guys as mappers may not like this, but mapping, grid searching is the lowest priority that we do.
Sure.
Interesting.
And that's because flying a grid search is the most effective, meaning that you cover everything underneath you, but it is the least inefficient because you're looking at mostly you're looking at areas where your probability of detection, probability of finding your lost individual is the lowest. So we exercise our lost person behavior to identify the areas of high probability, and we fly direct to those areas first to do hasty searches. In addition, depending on the area that you're searching in, like up in Oregon or any of the mountainous terrain, you're going to have a lot of tree canopy.
Mm-hmm.
Doing a mapping mission, you're going to miss, even though you're flying over and capturing 100% with overlap the areas that you're flying, but you're going to be missing maybe 60 to 70% of the ground that you're flying over because of the tree canopy. So that's why it's our lowest priority. So we're going to do manual searches, and we train on how to effectively search an area so that you're capturing everything as best as you possibly can underneath the tree canopy, near the rivers, all over the place. And we practice that, how to search and clear an area effectively. And so while doing that, we'll be broadcasting that video back to our incident command, where we'll have a video data technician, someone that's trained and is proficient at looking at our screen.
Is it safe to say that you always have thermal with the visual? So it's always RGB and always thermal. So you're not just going out with just a visual camera, so to speak. You're going out with both sensors on every time you're going out. Okay.
We're going out with everything possible. So everything that is all the tools available on the drone. So that's so let's look at the like the Autel Evo 2 or the Matrice 3010 or 30T, excuse me. And it has the zoom camera, thermal camera, a wide angle lens, laser rangefinder, spotlight, and we're bouncing through all of those all the time, because if you just stay in the zoom camera, you're gonna end up doing what we call zoom trolling, where you're gonna be kind of just searching that area and kind of scanning that area, but since you're so deep in the zoom, you're gonna lose your situational awareness. So we consistently will back out to our wide angle and then readjust the camera and then punch into the zoom, come back out into the wide, readjust, punch into the zoom, or flip it to the thermal camera. So then that way we can thoroughly say that, yeah, we searched this whole area using all of the assets available to us. And we don't use absolutes, because you cannot confidently say that nobody was in that area is clear until you have everybody up in that area standing shoulder to shoulder marching through the area, is pretty much the only means by which you can firmly say that an area is clear. So when we give our reports, is that I searched that area and nothing was detected. Doesn't mean that nobody was there, just that nobody was detected. And that's, you cannot, a good canine handler is very much the same way. They'll say, I searched this area with my canine and I had no behavior changes. If a canine handler comes back and says, no, that area is clear, it's negative, nobody's there, well, they're not going to be there. That's a good indication that they're not a very good canine handler, because we can't speak in absolutes, because we're not 100% accurate in anything.
Right.
So we just need to do the best we can. So to answer your question, Scott, I'm so sorry, I got sidetracked.
No, this is great.
So we do use that broadcasting technology first, and we do that. Now, let's say we've searched the entire mountainside and searched the entire trail, everything, and we still can't find them. Then we'll move to our mapping, and we'll use some post-processing software like Locate, Eagle Eyes, or some of the others that are available to us to help us find unnatural colors or shapes to help us find our lost individual. Those are highly effective. They are fantastic softwares.
Is that creating an ortho mosaic and then using the ortho to do like an AI detection of those colors, or what does it look like?
No, it's taking the individual photos and analyzing every single pixel.
I see.
Okay. Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense, because I'll just say I've seen a lot of like mapping software kind of like side marketed for SAR, and it's like, oh, you can make an ortho real quick. And I can tell you, yeah, searching through an ortho does not sound like a very efficient way to look for people. That has to happen on a computer and a nice screen, and it's just like it's an office activity in a way, I find. So,
well, we're racing against the clock, right? We need to find our people as fast as possible. So that's why we have this different search priorities, that we need to find or use our most efficient manner to find people first and then work on down. So now typically we don't break into the mapping and doing the post-processing until it pretty much turns into recovery. And I'm speaking in very general terms. That's not always the case, because there are areas where it's just not conducive to do a mapping mission, especially like around cliffs or very, very steep terrain with a huge like pine evergreen cover. It just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm trying to say is that not every single search, not every single area is the same. So we have general guidelines to help us choose the most efficient manner to conduct that search. And then we use different software that will help us make that search more efficient. Like Locate, the gentleman that founded Locate, Michael, he's very passionate about his technology, and he by far is leading the way with the pixel analyzing software. And he also has the capability to do it with radiometric thermal images as well. He with Locate, and that's LOC and then the number 8. He's developed a means by which that he can even find clandestine graves that are 6 months old with his technology. So powerful stuff that's out there. And it's, so the trick is no single environment is the same, and no search and rescue or public safety team is the same. And so every single team, depending on their area, their team makeup, their fleet, will have different software technologies to help them in that effort. And there really isn't one best way. It's just what works best for that particular team. And what works well for me and my team here in the mountains, the Rocky Mountains here in Utah, won't work great for some people out in Nebraska, for example. So it's finding what works best, finding the software and the technologies that work best for your team dynamic, your team workflow, and the skills and the talents that are also involved with your team as well. So a lot of variables.
Yeah. So Scott and I are aligned with using our businesses as a force of good, and something that I've looked into here locally is how could I offer my services for search and rescue. And I've looked into some of the organizations here, and, and then things get busy and it gets put on the side burner. But this conversation is definitely getting me excited to get back and reach out to these folks. How do you coordinate with other organizations? And when you're in an incident and you're dealing with different agencies, because when the hurricane came through Helene, and there was all that, just the tragic visuals you were seeing in North Carolina, and having lived in that part of the world for a while, it's fond to me. And I'm like, how can I help? So I was reaching out to people like, how could I help? Could I come and provide mapping services, visuals, and same thing in Southern California. It's like, what could I do to help this situation? And, we were talking like, if you're in the heat of the moment, it's probably too late. Like they're focused on the emergency at hand, and vetting a new relationship with somebody is probably not the right timing. So just thinking about how, I guess, two-part question, when you are coordinating with other agencies, what does that look like for you now? And then part two of that is like, for people that do want to get involved with this, like, what are some of the recommendations that you would let people know about?
Yeah, great question. I wish that there was amazing coordination between agencies, and unfortunately, sometimes there isn't. A lot of times, like in North Carolina, there was a pretty big power struggle between different agencies, and then of course, when you toss FEMA into the mix, FEMA is notoriously bad about not coordinating very well, and then also going into an area. I mean, you can imagine where you guys live, having a federal agency come in and say, "Hey, I know better. I know how to run your environment better than you know how to run it." And that's essentially what happens with FEMA, rather than allowing the boots on the ground, the experts, the people that have been there, know the ins and outs, run it. Of course, it's always a big power struggle, unfortunately. But locally, for example, this is where, when it comes to drone coordination and drone operations, this is where DroneSense, that company, actually really shines. So if you have two different agencies that are running DroneSense, they can all be pumping their same feed into the same headquarters so that everything is coordinated. And then also on the map, on the controller itself, on your control station, you can actually see where all the other drones are as well. So every single pilot is abreast of the situation and knowing where even the other aircraft are. I was lucky enough to be in Washington, D.C. for the inauguration, to fly air support, coordinating with the Secret Service and every the rest of the agencies. So wow. I was teamed up with Arlington Police Department and a few of the other agencies out there. And so the team that I was with, we were on top of a rooftop, and we had our area to survey and to keep an eye on, and a particular bridge. And we were all tied in with DroneSense, and it was amazing for the incident commanders to be able to, and then also the Secret Service was in that same room, for them to be able to see everything that was going on all at once. And so then they could flip from camera feed, from drone feed to another drone feed to another drone feed, or have them all up at once, and then have a big map up there so they could see where all the drones were. And this is something that agencies throughout the country have access to, and it's an amazing coordinating technology to be able to bring all of that information into one source. So DJI also, through Flight Hub 2, also has a similar feature, and there are other software programs out there. So understanding and knowing that technology and how to leverage it is probably the best way to coordinate with other agencies. And then also, if you're an agency that has a technology or a software, have something set up ready to go, so that when another agency comes in, you can just go ahead and plug and play them into yours with a very quick briefing and how to do it. The second part of your question, when it comes to having people volunteer, you're absolutely right, Mike. The day of the incident is the worst time to show up and volunteer your time, because for example, this has happened several times with search and rescue. We'll have a big search, and we'll have just a random drone pilot show up and say, "Hey, I have my Mavic or my Mini 4 Pro, and here I'm an able body and I want to help." And it's hard to turn people away, because there's so much more going on and coordination that we don't have the time, or the bandwidth, I should say. I don't have the bandwidth to try to teach somebody else how to effectively search an area, to make sure that they are flying in their area, so I don't have to worry about the other pilots flying, coordinate, that whole coordination. And then also, if I put them up into an area, I don't want to have to convert this search into searching for them.
Right.
And so, and that's, that goes beyond just drone pilots, because a lot of times you're not searching from incident command, you're sending them out in the field. And so are you sure that they have all the equipment that they need in order to survive the elements to get back? Do they have enough water? It's just there's too many variables that are in play. So
Yeah.
if you can go and establish that relationship beforehand. So if you're in an area that you want to be able to volunteer your efforts, now's the time to go in and volunteer your efforts and let them know that you're available. Let them know what your strengths are. So like mapping in a disaster area, mapping and search and rescue isn't necessarily something that we do on the routine, but in a natural disaster, mapping is so vitally crucial. You need to be able to map the area to know the layout of the land on how to deploy your assets, your ground teams, your aerial assets, and everything else. So if you're an expert mapper, making yourself aware or allowing the agency, your local agency, know that you're an expert mapper, and if it hits the fan and you have a natural disaster, they know they can call on you to come in and execute that mission. So establishing that relationship prior is key.
Yeah.
So then that way we know that you're there. So you're not just showing up day of and saying, hey, I have this, I can go do that. We'll be like, I'm sorry, who are you? What are your qualifications?
It takes more to manage the volunteers. I've managed volunteer groups before, and sometimes it's, of course, you appreciate their drive and the fact that they want to be there and help, but it's hard to be like, well, like you said, your bandwidth is only so much, and you really need to be laser focused on what's in front of you.
Yeah.
Well, and we also have a risk matrix, right? So at what point do we allow or accept that additional level of risk of deploying more people into the field that we don't know whether or not they're trained or capable?
Yeah. Very good point.
Tough because comes from a good place. I'm sure you have people who mean well. Sounds like most of your interactions with the public and have been very, very positive. But have you encountered anyone passersby who kind of, you'd say, is a negative opinion about drones, or was a little more confrontational? And if so, what'd you say to them, or how you deal with that?
Yeah, of course it's happened. Yeah. We were there was a trailhead and there were some homes that are relatively close to this trailhead, and there was a report that there was somebody up on top of the mountain with their flashlight, and they were flashing the Morse code for SOS. And so we had to go investigate. So we were launching from the trailhead and flying up the mountain, and of course there was this drunk guy in his backyard watching the drones go, and he thought for sure that we were spying on his backyard and his campfire and everything else that was going on in his backyard. And he came out and he was ready to go toe to toe. And thankfully, we had a deputy with us and was able to calm him down. But those situations do happen. And the best thing to do, I believe, is just to stay calm and not escalate to their level or elevate to their level. I think when it comes to drones and the fear or the hatred towards drones comes from a lack of information or understanding as to what they are, first off, what the laws are, second of all, and what the mission sets that these drones go into.
Yeah.
And of course, everybody thinks that their lives are so vitally important that they need, hence social media and people broadcasting and putting on their stories, everything that they're doing there. Everybody thinks that their lives are so important. Everybody wants to spy on them, right? And but I have found that if you stay calm and just briefly explain what it is that you're doing. Now, if you're part of search and rescue, thankfully, search and rescue is one of those areas where the public has huge buy-in. If you say, sir, I'm so sorry that you're being disrupted right now, but we're conducting a search and rescue mission. If you'd like to come on over here and stand close to me, please don't bother me. But if you'd like to kind of see what it is that I'm looking at or kind of watch the operation, just stand there. You're welcome to participate. You're welcome to stand there. You're welcome to observe, and you can see that we're flying towards the mountains or towards this area. We're trying to save a life. Could you please just hang tight, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. We're glad you're out here. Thank you so much for your concerns, and just kind of not escalate.
It's pretty hard to stay mad
But
That's
you know,
it.
so Ken Dono, who has a YouTube channel, the original Dobo, he's a good friend of mine, and he does a lot of real estate video, and so he runs into this problem a lot more than I
I
do.
bet. Yeah.
And because he's flying over people's houses, so he might, his target house is in one area, but in order for him to get photos of that house, he physically has to fly over someone else's property, and so he's just the nature of his work sets him up for some potential confrontation, and of course he does a very good job at lowering the temper of, or the temperature of the situation. But it does happen, and
maybe they should have in addition to your trust certificate, you have to take conflict resolution 101.
Right.
And your part
Right.
107. I think conflict resolution is a skill that's everybody should have and should be aware of.
Yeah,
some
for
people are
sure.
just naturally good at it, but I think there's definitely a science to it of how to diffuse situations when people are pretty upset.
As time goes on, as this technology is more widely accepted, or people have more exposure to it, it does seem like, New Jersey and all that fiasco aside, I do think it does seem to have been it's slowing down a little bit.
Yeah.
I might be wrong on that, but it does seem like it's starting to slow down.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're winding down here. I have a 2-part final question. One is, what are you guys looking at as far from the search and rescue standpoint to invest in from an equipment? Is there something that has your eye? It's like, this is going to be a critical part of our fleet in the near future. We're saving up for it, fundraising, or do you feel like the tools that are available in the marketplace now are, maybe you already have them in your fleet and they're serving their purpose, or just bigger, maybe looking down the road a little bit?
Well, as of right now, we always want, when it comes to public safety, flight time is everything. Battery life is our lifeline. And I would much rather have a lower resolution camera, or not quite as powerful of a optical zoom lens or something, to be able to get more flight time. Flight time is everything. And so the direction in which I hope the industry goes is with the battery technology. I'm hoping that battery technology gets better. These aircraft get lighter to be able to accommodate more battery power. The H30T, for example, on the Matrice 350 is so powerful with the high resolution thermal camera, is so good. I just don't know, just as technology increases, the next greatest thing, of course, we'd like to get. I certainly hope that the legislation that is going now from state to state, there are certain U.S. Drone manufacturers that have built subpar drones, and so now they're trying to turn to legislation to be able to sell their aircraft.
Yep.
I certainly hope they're paying attention. Missouri just had a committee meeting on this subject, and law enforcement officers and fire departments showed up in such mass quantities. I hope these U.S. drone manufacturers are realizing that they cannot say that they're advocating or that they support public safety when they're actively trying to destroy it and force us with inferior drones. In search and rescue, for example, if I was forced to use a U.S. manufactured drone, people would die. And that's not hyperbole. There have been rescues where I would not be able to get a Skydio X10 to. I would not be able to get the Break responder. Forget about it. One, you can't buy them. They're just not available. The Lemur 2 also does not have the connectivity to be able to deploy. People would die.
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping that, I guess when it comes to that, I'm hoping that the U.S.-based technology is elevated and gets better. My big wish when it comes to technology is, we talked about the Starlink Mini, it's the size of a small laptop computer right now. But if they can get that thing even smaller, such that we can put that onto the back of a drone, or have that be the connectivity device on these quadcopters, man, then You'd only be limited by battery power. You can send that thing so far downrange to be able to go search for people. That would be such a huge leap forward in technology that we would be able to save countless more lives if we can have that Starlink connectivity on the drone. That's where I'm very hopeful this technology goes to.
Yeah. I'm sure it's all coming. It's just a matter of when. Everything's getting smaller. And okay. Last question. We want to end each episode with something that inspired you and you feel might inspire someone else who's looking to make a difference in this field. And it could be, was it a book you read? Was it an article, or was it just an experience you had? Just something that shaped your opinion that you feel might be inspiring for other listeners.
If you'll forgive me, I'd like to tell you a story of one of our rescues.
Please do.
Go for it.
It's a kind of a sad one of sorts, but it does have a happy ending.
Okay.
And it's one that was very emotionally trying to me, one that really put me through the ringer and questioning whether or not I even wanted to continue doing search and rescue.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's always been the minors. It's always been children that it's so hard to see them hurting and in pain. We had this rescue where a young man came from Michigan and was out vacationing here in our mountains. But if I remember right, he was out here visiting for his uncle's wedding, but had been out here quite frequently, knew the mountains pretty well, and was an avid rock climber. So he decided to go out, do a free solo by himself and climb without a harness, just a chalk bag and some climbing shoes. It was warm enough that while he was climbing on the west face, that the sun beating against those red rocks, that heated up quite a bit, and he took his shirt off. And so he was just climbing in his pants. He called his dad when he was about halfway up saying, "Hey, I got myself into a little bit of a pickle. But I think I see a way down out of this, so I'll give you a call back." The dad said, "Okay, but if you don't call me back within 30 minutes, I'm calling search and rescue." Those 30 minutes came and went, no phone call. The father went to the trailhead to try to find his son, to call out to see if he could find him. No go. So he called search and rescue. So we get the phone call. Now, this was a phone call for an overdue climber. Overdue climbers are totally, it's kind of more often than not, when you get a call for an overdue climber or hiker, by the time we assemble and show up at the parking lot at the trailhead is usually when they show up out of, and they're coming down. They're just fine. They just were out, went a little bit longer, a little bit further.
Yeah.
And so we didn't spin up the whole team right at first, but we did spin up a hasty team. Our four of our best, most advanced climbers, because we knew that this was going to be a high angle rescue if it turned into that, and then me. So I show up on scene and I pull out the Matrice 30T and I go through one battery set. I had my search area. It was an area that is very common amongst boulderers and people that like to do the climbing out in this area. So I started searching, and my search routine of what I was breaking into as a hasty search. Didn't find him on that first set. I came back, did a hot swap, and by that time our 4-man hasty team search started out onto the trail, and I launched again. And in the process of going through my search, I found this. He was 17 years old. This young man was 17. I found his backpack and with his shoes and his water bottle. And so the thought process from there was, so I marked the location, got the latitude and longitude of those, the backpack, and we radioed those to our hasty team. So they started moving in that direction. And so the thought process is that, okay, that was right at the base of the cliff. So he had to have been somewhat close to that. So I started scanning the cliff and the cliff bottoms along that area. And I found him really quick thereafter. And he was still alive, and just in positions. His lower body were in positions that they shouldn't have been, and obviously unable to move.
Yeah.
So by this time it was dark. I had the spotlight on the drone, so I was able to light up the mountainside with the GL60 Mini on top of the Matrice 30T, and radioed the coordinates to the ground team. And of course, they were able to see the condition of the young man on his cell phone, because we were also broadcasting the image.
All right.
And my team was still 20 minutes away, and so it was just me and that young man. I was just watching him through the screen. He was moving, but obviously in a lot of pain. And as I was watching that screen, I was trying to will my team to move faster. Like, why aren't they there yet? Get there now. And they finally got there. And they started assessing him and taking care of him. But this young man coded, and they had to start compressions.
Gosh.
And so this is the first time in our team's history that we have ever had this happen while a patient expires or needing compression in our custody. Sometimes it happens afterwards, or we get there after the compressions by the bystanders had already taken place, and they had already expired by the time we get there. So this was a new thing for us. But one of the on our Hasty team, he was a medical doctor. He was in very good hands with our Hasty team up there. Hoist, the helicopter came. They executed the hoist and got him to the helicopter, or got him to the hospital very, very fast. And in the ER, they were able to retrieve his pulse twice. They got it back, expired again, got his pulse back, and then they lost it. And we got that news that he didn't make it. And it was impactful to all of us. It was impactful for me because of the feeling of helplessness as I was standing there staring at the screen, willing my team to get there. Like, it was just me and him, me and the young man, and nobody else was watching. It was just me and him.
Wow.
And he didn't know I was there,
right?
But I knew I was there, and I had sent help. But later, about a week later, so after that event, I thought about getting out of search and rescue. That my weak little heart couldn't handle this kind of action. I can't handle this kind of stuff. But then we got a phone call from the family, because we were able to get to him so quickly, because we were able to start those compressions. If we didn't have the drone, we would have found him expired, and he wouldn't have had a shot.
Yeah.
But the family informed us that because he was an organ donor and because we were able to do compressions, he saved 12 other lives.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
And so it was a roller coaster of emotions. I can't imagine what it was like for the family. But so to go from, I'm done with this search and rescue business, I can't handle it, I can't handle watching kids die, I can't handle this, to holy cow, thanks to our efforts, my team, we helped that young man save 12 other lives. So it was the search and rescue world, public safety, and I'm just a dumb public safety, or I'm just a search and rescue volunteer. You talk to these firemen, these paramedics, ER physicians, ER nurses, they go through this all the time, and I don't know how they do it. But when you're in public safety and you're in trying to help save lives, and you're doing your best and leveraging technology to be able to do it, to me, there's no better feeling knowing that you helped change someone's life, even when you feel like you failed, like we did with this young man. The end result was that we helped that young man save 12 other lives. And so if you can get out and volunteer, and if you can help, please do so. It gives you back more than you will ever give it. And why this story alone is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this legislation and the potential damages that it will come down from it. But Get out and volunteer, get out and do your best. Be a leader in your community. Everybody can get out there and do this. This is not anything that requires, all it requires is just your time and your efforts.
Yeah. Kyle, thank you for sharing that story. I mean, clearly it was impactful. I could see it. I mean, I know there's people listening, but I could see it on your face. Like there was a lot of anguish, and it was a powerful moment, and it was giving him a fighting chance. And to hear like the end result of that is, wow. I mean,
I don't think there's any higher calling you can have with this kind of technology or this kind of thing than a situation like that. So really, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and if that isn't a call to action,
to tell the story, guys. I
appreciate
that.
Well, and if that isn't a call to action for people to get out there and volunteer your time and help where you can, and not to you mentioned on the political side of it, like the whole landscape that's happening with that. Like I know that we focused on safety early in the discussion here, and it's like that. It just the platforms are safe and they save lives, and there's a lot more to it. And I'm also glad to hear that there's law enforcement agencies around the country that are making their voices heard around that subject too. So, man, that. That I think it's hard to follow up with anything other than that than just get out there, do what you can, and just amazing conversation, Kyle. Really appreciate your time today, and I really enjoyed our time together.
Well, likewise. And I do appreciate you guys and the work that you do in putting out the knowledge and the information of how much this technology helps not only save lives, but also just the economy and the public as members of the society. This technology saves or increases our level of life. It's amazing bit of technology, and every aspect of it I think is absolutely amazing. If anybody wants more information as to how to join the search and rescue team, or has more questions on how to enhance their search and rescue searches or their team, please reach out to me, and I'm happy to help. I
appreciate that.
I do speak at a bunch of different conferences throughout the country. If you are in law enforcement, I think one of the best resources you can access is the Law Enforcement Drone Association, LEDA.us. They're an amazing resource. And then also the Pilot Institute is also a fantastic resource as well.
Yeah. Great. Awesome. Thanks for sharing those resources and your time. And hopefully I get to meet you in person one of these days. Maybe I'll look for you on my next Alaska flight. And
please do. It'll be great to have you up there in the flight deck.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kyle. Great. Scott, good to see you. And we'll catch up on the next episode.
Yeah. Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you.